Cell Salt Astrology Cancer, Part 2. We're going to touch on a little more esoteric notes. Nothing too deep, but just to get into a little bit more and expand a little bit more of what I was talking about in Part 1. This is going to be based on George W. Carey's book and Inez Perry. And George Carey would say to know that a certain inorganic salt is indicated by certain symptoms is one thing, but to know the process of how it works to accomplish certain results is another. And this is an important statement because it's very easy to read signs and symptoms from our diagnostic techniques. That is, and one of the key things about this salt is the face, using these salts as face recognition and tongue diagnosis. And I would say, I'm taking it a bit further, you can even apply pulse diagnosis to this from a Chinese medical point of view. But what he means, I would say by this, is we've got to know things as deep as we can, because the body can give us false signs and symptoms that aren't true to diagnosis. For example, in Chinese medicine, we can have false cold or false heat. And, if we prescribe the wrong formulas, then the person's going to end up in trouble. So to know the intricate ways of how these salts really work from that biochem level is important. And like in the previous talk, I talked about the fluoride of lime is found in the enamel of teeth, connective tissue, and elastic fibers of all muscle tissue. So a lack of elastic fiber in muscle or tissue causes falling of the womb, prolapse, varicose veins, and a bearing down sensation, like the body's, we can have that as an example in the stomach or the womb, most of the most common places. We can have this when this deficiency of salt comes in, and this bearing down sensation is a warning sign that the body is about to, some of the organs are in trouble. There's a prolapse about to happen. And so on a further note, he'd say when a deficiency in this salt occurs in the connective tissue between the cerebrum and the cerebellum, an abnormal process of thoughts occur, causing groundless fears and financial ruin. So one of his discoveries in the research of the salt, one is that the fears we can have, fears of financial ruin, fear of parting with money, hoarding our money, too scared to let it go. And then secondly, one of his discoveries was the web-like formations in the body must contain this salt. And one of the most common places of this is the arachnoid, the spiderweb membrane that envelops the brain, and the spinal cord must require a large portion of calcium fluoride. So, and you can look at anatomy in text and see this web-like formation which surrounds the brain and the spinal cord. And a deficiency in this will cause a significant weakening of the mental process. For a start, we can have incoherent thoughts. Most commonly, one of the ones will be brain fog. Can't think clearly, head's heavy. Another indication of that is the wanting to fall asleep quite all the time, can't keep the eyes open, this kind of thing. And this connects more esoterically to that spleen function, and as Perry was talking about in relation to the spleen, that the spleen has a raising function. It raises chi up into the brain and ignites it, and we can feel vital. So there's a lot of emphasis around this webbing, and the webbing connects to the muscle tissue. So we can have a lax in that. We can have emaciated muscles, weakening of the tissue. They just sag. They've got no tone, no strength. also, and you can clearly see these webbing formations in anatomy texts. So just before, when I was mentioning about the connection with the brain, also the moon has, obviously, it's where we get the term lunatic. Very particular mental conditions are noted from this deficiency, George Carey would say, and particularly that fear of poverty, like I mentioned. Fear of poverty, financial ruin, fear of wanting to part with your money. Never feel like you can have enough, never confident around that issue. So, and speaking of lunar and lunatic, the lunar function is deeply connected with the menses. The word flux comes from this. It also produces the menstrual flow. Since it's ruled by the moon rules the ebbs and flows of the tides of the cycle. Also, the deficiency and weakening of this soul causes very painful periods like the prolapse conditions, bearing down sensations, heavy bleeding, flooding, to the point where you become so deficient that, you just got no chi and blood left to, you're just going to feel incredibly tired and fatigued. But the calcium fluoride, and as Perry would say, is necessary in fusing together all kinds of material to make corpuscles or seeds. So another function, it decomposes water in the atmosphere and thus furnishes the spiritual germ enclosed within the corpuscle with the ozonized oxygen or electrified air, which is its particular energizer. So she's talking about chi and blood. So chi is air, gas, and they both need to be in combination for the body to be fertile, so to speak. And it's like in Chinese medicine, you can't have chi without blood. They're like pairs. So chi leads the blood. The Chinese would say it's not the heart that pumps blood and moves blood around the body. It's actually chi. And also, you can tie in with what she's talking about here with Wilhelm Reich's work in what he's talking about in orgone energy. So space is considered nutrition. It has healing properties. And she was saying, like, these corpuscles, which are like a minute body or a cell in an organism, for example, or the corpuscles are found in the red and white blood cells, particularly in the vertebrae. So this is why, if you don't have enough chi and blood, it's very hard to conceive. There's a lot of this is why, and I would throw in essence in there, but that's a different subject altogether. But just sticking with what she's talking about here and trying to make those connections there, that she would say this is why cancer is one of the primary signs for fertility. So women, who have moons in Cancer, if it's not heavily aspected by things, it's very easy for them to conceive. They're considered quite fertile. Most water signs are, but particularly Cancer is. So, and the crab is also a symbol of our lower nature, and it's one of the celestial portals. So this is where, in Roman astrology, they would say that the Cancer, the constellation, is the gates of men. And it relates to Ursa Minor and Major, the Great Bear, but that's a whole different topic altogether. I don't want to get into that there, but that's a fascinating one. But in Roman astrology, they say it's connected to the gates of men, which is the route taken by souls of baby destined to be born on Earth. So to come in here, it's almost like we go through the portal of Cancer, which is fascinating. So, and on just a more kind of trivia for you, like the constellation of Cancer, the Egyptians, the Hindus, the Chinese, the Babylonians, and most of the other civilizations around the world are all convinced that the world would end when the planets come into line, and each of them are in the constellation of the Crab, which is quite fascinating. but I don't want to preach, doom and gloom here, but I thought that was an interesting thing to throw in. But just on another note for you guys who are interested, the cancer rules the breast, the epigastric region, and the elbows from anatomy and phys perspective, but also internally rules stomach, spleen, and digestive organs and the womb. This is why, cancer people or, anything that is heavily aspecting your moon can affect the stomach, can make changes in the stomach, particularly, for an example, if you've got Uranus in contact with your moon, you can have certain sudden changes within the gut, the digestive organs, or even the womb. Structurally, it rules the ribs, sternum, and elbow joint, and also the blood serum and the coverings of the veins and the elasticity. The elasticity is one of the key things about this salt, which is indicated. So we're going to move on next we're going to get into the cell salt of Magphos, which is ruled by Leo. So stay tuned for that one.